Hi everyone, it's me. It's that time of the year. We are, I think, like just a little bit past like the exact half a year mark. I think it's about time to do a mid-year book tag. So that's what we're gonna do today. Grab a snack, let's hang out together and talk about some of the books that we've read so far this year. My reading goal this year was 100 books. I so far have read 78 books and I am 27 books ahead of schedule. We may have to reevaluate the reading goal because I'm so close to finishing it already. Needless to say, I have read a lot of books this year, some good, some bad, and we're not going to talk about all of them in this video, but we're going to talk about a good selection that I've read this year. So we're going to start out with some kind of like for fun tags, and then we're going to get to like the more serious tags at the end. You know what I mean? Like the best overall type of thing. We're gonna save those for the end. We're gonna start with the fun, fluffy book tag categories first. The first we're going to talk about is my favorite FMC. I'm gonna have to say Priory from Six Crimson Cranes. This one might be a little bit of like a black sheep choice. If you haven't read this book, Priory is like a very more gentle FMC type character, which I think I really loved because it was just really refreshing to read an FMC in a fantasy book that wasn't like some big strong warrior who was training to fight and who had like amazing combat skills and stuff like that. I feel like we get a lot of those, especially in newer fantasies. That's definitely a trend, which I love. Like I eat all those books up as well. But I feel like because Priory in this book, she was a princess, she took more of a gentle approach in terms of like nurturing and caring for the people she loves. I really loved Priory. She was just caring. She loved her family and her brothers so much. She was very understanding and compassionate. That really resonated with me in this sea of like assassin warrior FMCs. Priory definitely has a soft spot in my heart and is also realistically probably the type of FMC that I would actually most likely be if I were thrown into a fantasy book. Like I always wish that I was like one of those, strong warrior type characters, but I definitely, like if I'm truly honest with myself, I'm not. And so yeah, I really love Priory for representing like that side of like a female FMC. Next up is prettiest book. That easily has to be Five Broken Blades. I'm sure you've been eyeing the spine as it's been on this little book stack, but how stunning is this sprayed edge? We gain more beauty points on those end papers, and then the actual like foil itself, when you take the beautiful dust jacket off, is also stunning. So this is for sure the most beautiful book I have read and purchased this year. There's also a map, of course. You can't judge the beauty of a fantasy book without looking at the map. Okay, next up, favorite couple of the year. This one was really hard for me to choose actually, so I picked two and I'm still very unsure of the choices I picked because there are a lot of couples that I liked, but the first one is from Crescent City, and no, it's not Bryce and Hunt, it is Lydia and Rune. Love them so much, and they honestly made this book for me. I know that this book has been very controversial in terms of the opinions and how people like this book. I kind of feel the same way. Like I definitely did enjoy this book, but I feel like everyone had such high expectations for this because of the second book in the series and what it was like leading up to. We all expect perfection from Sarah J. Maas at this point, and I feel like this book disappointed a lot of people, but I still enjoyed reading it. I still had a really fun experience, and although the main couple in this book is not my favorite, I really liked Rune and Lydia in this, and it definitely overshadowed the main romantic couple, but I love them so much, so it's fine. And then I also want to give a shout out to Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Mallory and Nolan in this book were so adorable. Were they teenagers? I feel like they were young adults. I can't remember what their ages were in this book, but they just wanted to play chess. They just wanted to love each other and play chess, and I felt like that was the most wholesome thing I have read in a very long time. So this isn't Ali Hazelwood, but it's her first YA, and I loved it. I devoured it. I ate it up. I enjoyed it way more than her adult like smutty books, to be completely honest. It was just so green flags. Like Nolan was like green flag prime example, perfect cinnamon roll. They were just so wholesome. Like so wholesome. Okay, next book tag is book that made me cry, and I definitely couldn't just choose one because so many books made me cry this year. So I'm going to list every book that has made me cry. so far. The first one was Crescent City. Again, I had mixed feelings about it, but it did end up making me cry at 2 points in the book. I did a reread of the first 3 books in the ACOWAR series, and very surprisingly, ACOWAR made me cry like 5 or 6 times on the reread. I didn't want to include rereads in this book tag, so I'm not counting like any of these ACOWAR rereads in any of the other book tags, but I feel like because this book made me cry 5 to 6 times on the reread, I felt like I needed to shout it out in this category. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr also made me sob. I still haven't watched the Netflix like adaptation of this book yet, but I've heard the book's better, so I kind of at this point don't want to be tainted if the Netflix series isn't as good, so I haven't watched it yet. If you did like the Netflix show, please convince me in the comments to watch it. A Song to Drown Rivers by Liang, and I will be talking more about this book in following tags, but speechless. The Burning God, obviously. I had an on-camera meltdown while reading this book. It's a video I made in January. It's the video where I finish up a bunch of series that I was in the middle of. I literally had an on-screen, on-camera breakdown, meltdown while reading this. So I would say it definitely made me cry. And the last book that made me cry this year so far, The Woman by Kristin Hannah. Surprisingly, her other books, I've also read The Nightingale and The Great Alone by her, and for some reason I did not shed a tear while reading those books. I did feel sad and I did feel like on the brink of crying, like I felt the tears forming, but I didn't cry. Okay, those are all the books that made me cry. And then I'm gonna have to dig up A Song to Drown Rivers by Liang again, because my next book tag is an underdog book that surprised me. And this book definitely did it. I had no expectations going into this book. I have never read an Liang book. I think she's written a couple other books, but none in this historical fantasy type of a genre. I literally had no idea what I was going into when I read this, because this, if you cannot see, is an advanced reader's edition. It is an ARC. This book actually releases in October. I think I've said this on my channel multiple times, but you need to pre-order this book right now. When I tell you this book took me for a ride, it was so surprising. It follows a Chinese legend based on Zixi and Fan Li. Zixi is this like very beautiful woman. She's like the most beautiful woman in China, and she's hired by the military advisor Fan Li to go to their enemy kingdom, seduce the king, and like take their kingdom down from within using her beauty. It was so emotional. It was so beautifully written. It hit me so hard in all the right ways, made me cry, made me feel pain, more pain than joy, but it was so beautiful. Highly recommend this one. What do we have next? Oh, we have Most Magical World, and that has to go to When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I think I gave this book a 5-star on Goodreads. I think it was more of a 4.5. Like now that I think back to it, I think it was a 4.5 star, because there were things in this book that annoyed me and frustrated me, and I have to be honest with that. The FMC in this book was very Selena coded. If you know, you know, very Selena coded, but kind of in the most frustrating, annoying ways. There were definitely some issues with the romance and the smut in this book, but the world was so magical that it made me enjoy the experience of this entire book so much. In this book, we have intense world building. The entire first chapter is dedicated to world building. It literally tells the legend or story of the creation of the world. So we have elemental gods that came together and created this world. We have dragons that fly up into the sky and crystallize into moons upon their death. I love the idea of dragon moons scattered across the entire sky. Like that just really got me. I still think about this world to this day. Not so much the story. Actually, I do think about the story occasionally, but mostly when I think back upon this book, I just have such fond memories of like existing in this world in my mind. So Most Magical World. Now we come to our first kind of like negative category, Most Disappointing Book of the Year. I have to say, and I'm so sad to say this, my heart's breaking, but This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. You guys know I have such a soft spot for Carley Fortune because she's Canadian, first of all. I have enjoyed her books in the past, and I really love that her stories are all set in Canadian locations that I myself have been to or lived in, and can just like, I just experience her books on a whole other level because of that. She does a really good job at describing these Canadian locations and capturing the feeling and essence of all the environments that she writes her stories in. And she's also really good at writing like tension between characters, I find. So I was really excited for this book. I did enjoy a lot of aspects of this book, like again, the mood, the environment, the atmosphere. Also really did feel a lot of the tension and the angst between our two main characters in this romance. But I just find the plot was very lacking in this book. Nothing much happened. It just kind of like, in a romance book, I usually want like ups and downs and emotions. I want topsy-turvy. I want to be like taken for a ride, and I feel like this book was just kind of like at the same level throughout the book. Even during like the third act conflict, which we all know happens in every single romance book, was very just monotone, kind of anticlimactic. I wanted more to happen. I wanted this book to be a little bit more juicy, but it was just more kind of like a solid, steady vibe throughout. So it did disappoint me because I found myself bored while reading it, and I didn't want to feel bored. So sad about it. Okay, one more negative category, and then we're gonna get back to the positivity. I swear, my least favorite book. I have a tie for this category. The first is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. This is a Norse mythology fantasy romance. I said I was bored while I was reading This Summer Will Be Different. I was like bored. I think the story had so much potential here, but the pacing was just so off. We didn't have any time to just like breathe and get to know our characters. And my impression of this book is that it was very high stakes, but it didn't feel high stakes at all because I didn't care about the characters at all. So like the main characters could have just like died, perished in any of the battles, and I don't think I would have cared, which is not a good thing. That's not what you want when you're reading like a high stakes fantasy romance. You really want to care about your characters and their well-being and hope they survive to tell the tale. But I was really bored while reading this. The second book that I need to shout out in this negative category is Not in Love by Hazelwood. It was not for me. I know that this was kind of a branching off for her in terms of genre. She mentioned herself this is more of like a smutty, spicy romance, erotica type of a book. I guess I didn't really get the memo when I picked it up. I read her little blurb about it, but I didn't really clue into my mind how spice only this book would be. It's really disappointing for me because I feel like this story could have been told very well if it was maybe written in her usual genre, because there were some interesting elements to the plot in terms of like the whole corporate drama fiasco, but the romance did not do it for me. It was just like lust only, smut only. 80% of the book, I swear, was just like spice scenes. Really not for me. So Not in Love by Hazelwood. Okay, we have a couple of just for fun categories. So the longest book I read this year technically was Manacled by SenLinYu, and I know that this is a fan fiction, so I don't know if it counts as like a book. On Goodreads, this book is listed as 925 pages. If we're talking about traditionally published books only, or like actually published books, it would be House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas, which is 835 pages. Also just wanted to give a shout out to a couple more long books that I've read this year. Priory of the Orange Tree, 830 pages. She's thick. The Hero of Ages, which I only have on Kindle, but is 785 pages. When the Moon Hatched, 730 pages. Those are all the longest books that I read this year. And for shortest book, Drop, Cover, and Hold On by Jasmine, Guillory, which was only 40 pages long. Okay, we're getting into the big categories. For favorite romance. Oh, why didn't I pick? I don't have that book with me. Why didn't I grab it? I need to go grab it. 1 second. Okay, favorite romance. Funny Story by Emily Henry. I'm sure you're not surprised by that. I love Emily Henry. I laughed. I felt emotional. I loved the couple in here. It was literally hilarious. I was like laughing out loud. Emily Henry can most of the time do no wrong. And then I actually have two more I want to shout out in this category. The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. So good. When I tell you, I was so skeptical going into that book, and even in the first 50% of the book while I was reading it, I was like, this seems so predictable. It seems so cheesy. Why is this everyone's favorite romance? Why is everyone talking about this? And then I read the last 50% of it, and it hit me so hard. It threw me in for a loop. Really great. Loved that. And then my third favorite romance of the year was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. It was so wholesome. The MMC, the love interest, was just like a bundle of green flags. Complete green flag guy. There's a lot of humor twisted in as well, similar to Funny Story. It was so cute to read. I loved it. My favorite fantasy so far this year, Fragile Threads of Power by V. Schwab. You guys know V. Schwab is currently one of my favorite authors, especially in the fantasy genre, and this book did not disappoint me. It is a spin-off from the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy, so if you want to read this book, I definitely recommend reading that trilogy first before going into this, because it is a very direct continuation of that series, and that series is also one of my favorites, so you're not going to lose out by reading A Darker Shade of Magic first. It's not like, you know, like some series, like spin-offs, where it's like the spin-off is better than the original, so a lot of people are like, don't bother reading the original because the spin-off is better, just read the spin-off. Not the case for this. A Darker Shade of Magic was so good, and the spin-off is so good, and I need V. Schwab to feed us more in this world and in this series. I know her release that comes out next year is not in this world. It's a standalone, which I have pre-ordered, and I'm also very excited about, but I just need more of this and these characters and this world. I need to be fed V. Schwab. Favorite non-romance and non-fantasy, because you guys know I mostly read fantasy and romance. I will have to say The Woman by Kristin Hannah. It is my favorite Kristin Hannah. I don't know if that's controversial, because I feel like I don't hear as many people talking about this book. When I hear Kristin Hannah, most people talk about The Nightingale, which I also really loved, but I don't know. Maybe it's because The Woman was my first Kristin Hannah I read. For me, this one's my favorite so far still. It tops the others. I love all her books. They're all at least a 4.5 for me, but this one I gave a 5-star. Favorite standalone. I know I've talked about this book already, but A Song to Drown Rivers by Liang. I can't even describe how this book took me by surprise. I had no idea what I was going into. I still think about this book to this day. So again, pre-order this book. No one's paying me to say that, by the way, but pre-order this book. Favorite series, The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. No question about it. Whew. It's one of those series that I definitely still think about. Not every day, but at least once a week. I did read The Poppy War and The Dragon Republic in 2023, like at the end of last year, but I finished it this year, so I think it counts for the 2024 book tag. If you're going into it, definitely make sure you're in like a good headspace and you know what you're getting into. There's a lot of war in this book, but a lot of events that are based in real history are depicted in this book, which makes it even harder to like digest when you read it. So definitely not a light read, but it is so good. I would even go so far to call it a masterpiece. This series as a whole is my favorite R.F. Kuang thus far. Regular books are down here. R.F. Kuang is here, and then her Poppy War series is like maybe off camera. Maybe it's like up there. Okay, I've just written down some of my favorite authors that I've read this year, so in no particular order: R.F. Kuang, obviously, V.E. Schwab, Kristin Hannah, Emily Henry, Sarah J. Maas, and Abby Jimenez. And then our final book tag, can we get a drum roll? That was probably the saddest drum roll ever. For my favorite book, my absolute top favorite book of 2024. Can you guess? Maybe everyone take a second right now to go to the comments and guess what I'm gonna say. I feel like you could guess it. It's pretty obvious. Do you have it all in the comments? Okay, 3, 2, 1. The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. I feel like I don't need to talk about this more. I've talked about this book specifically already. I've talked about the Poppy War trilogy as a whole. It's just a masterpiece, and this book left me broken, but also just so appreciative of this series and the writing and the journey we went on. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. Without a question, favorite book so far of 2024, and I read this in January, so like the fact that I read this 6 months ago and it is still my top favorite book of the year is saying something. And that's it for this video. That is my mid-year book tag. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, maybe go through all the categories, go through all the tags that we talked about in this video, and let me know what your answers would be for each of the categories, or at least for some of them, if you can't think of all of them. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!